Well, this is an interest. The second question's interesting. But I'll answer the first one first. So I moved basically because when I was in university, I had some courses that I needed to fill in terms of credit hours, some hours I needed to graduate, and one of the opportunities was to study abroad for just 2 weeks in Costa Rica, and so uh, I went, and I liked it a lot, and I realized, okay, this is, it's a pretty good quality of life too. It's not.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. And it's a pleasure to have you here for another native English speaker conversation between myself, Lewis. I'm from the United Kingdom, but I'm wearing a Real Betis shirt because Mucho Betis, my favorite team in Spain. And of course, I have another fantastic guest with me today. And we're going to have a little chat for about 45 minutes to get to know him, where he's from, what he does, and so on and so forth. So that's enough from me from now. So, Charlie or Profe Charlie, hello, how are you?
Good. Thanks, Lewis, for the invitation.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So, of course, people can see your name is Profe Charlie, so Teacher Charlie. Do us a favor, tell everybody about you, introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello. So, my name is Charlie, and I am from Chicago, Illinois, in the United States. I've been teaching English for about 7 years now, and I specifically teach Spanish speakers that have an intermediate level, advanced level, a lot of stuff about, getting jobs and, preparing for meetings, interviews, stuff like that, and increasing fluency, being able to travel in English, stuff like that. So, yeah, I speak English, Spanish, Portuguese, and German. I'm a language learner myself, and yeah, happy to be here.
Fun. So we're going to pick apart all of these little things you said. So first of all, you're from Chicago, Illinois. Tell us about the city. What's it like? I've never been, so I'm all ears to hear about it.
Yeah. Okay. Chicago it's very big. It's a little bit over 2 million people. The weather is not great. It's very cold for, I would say, 6 months of the year. The summers are beautiful, but it can also get very hot. It's right along the Lake Michigan in the US. It's part of the Great Lakes, if you've ever heard of that. And yeah, it's in the Midwest region of the United States. And yeah, the metropolitan area, the area around the city, is also very big. I think it's the third biggest city in the United States. A lot of sports teams, a lot of food. Specifically, maybe you've heard of Chicago style pizza or
Uh-huh.
deep dish pizza. That's very common in Chicago. But also a lot of good Mexican food. There's a big Mexican population in Chicago. Yeah, it's a cool city. There's unlimited amount of things to do.
And then speaking about the pizza, the deep dish pizza, how is it different to a normal Italian pizza or like a kind of New York style pizza?
Yes, the New York style pizza is very thin. And deep dish is like, depending
Big.
on the place you order it, yeah, it's very thick. There's just more of everything. More more cheese, more sauce, sometimes toppings on top, sometimes in the middle. And the other thing is you can have only one or two pieces and you're full. Yeah. Once you go, you can't have like three, four, five, like you can with other, normal New York style or maybe Italian style pizzas. Deep dishes it's like a lasagna pizza or a cake pizza. It's really big.
And would you say it's tastier than a New York style pizza?
It's a good question. I would say it's just as good. It's not better nor worse. It's just different. I would say that's it. I think like after a certain amount of time, I would rather have a deep dish pizza because it's not available and at least not as good like in other parts of both the United States and the world. Whereas you can get like New York style pizza, not exactly like New York, but that thin crust pizza pretty much anywhere. So sometimes I crave a little bit more that deep dish pizza, but they're both, to me, they're both very good.
Very diplomatic of you, and a nice expression, a nice verb that you used. It was to crave. If you crave something, it's like you have an urge, a strong desire to eat something. I'm craving a pizza, or I have a craving for pizza. So we can use it as a verb or as a phrase like to have a craving for something. Now, a little bit of small talk, given that we're starting with a little chit chat. You mentioned the weather isn't very good. So, what's it like in winter and what's it like in summer?
Yeah, good question. So we'll start with the summer. It's only maybe 2 months long or 3 months long of like a true summer. I think it starts maybe around May and ends early September or end of August. I would say, yeah, May is pretty good weather for the most part in terms of like it's not that hot, but then it gets pretty hot around July and August. And by hot, I would say it can go up to in Celsius maybe between 30 and 36 degrees sometimes. Uh, Usually a little bit lower, I would say usually, but it can get hot. And then in winter, it can be pretty miserable. It depends on the type of winter though. We've had some more mild winters, so not as severe recently. And yeah, that it can get as low as negative 25 or 30 degrees Celsius. And yeah, we also have people talk about the wind chill, which is the sensation. What does it really feel like? And that wind chill goes even further, minus 35, 40, 50. And yeah, more than anything, it's a long winter. It starts in, I would say, November, ends, you know, generally it might end around March, but it can extend. There's even sometimes snow in April or in October. And so yeah, January is definitely the month that you don't really need to be in Chicago unless you want to see the snow. If you want to see the snow, that's the month to be there. But be prepared. After a couple minutes, it's not going to feel as good. You're going to enjoy the snow, and then you'll be like, okay, this is really cold. Let me go inside. So yeah,
I
that's
mean,
what the weather's like.
summer sounds bearable because I used to live in Seville, and in Seville in the south of Spain, like summer can begin at the beginning of May and end at the end of September, and it's consistently like 35 degrees. And if there's a heat wave, it can be 40 degrees for like a whole week nonstop. So you have to live with air conditioning. You adapt your kind of schedules to the heat as well. This is kind of why a lot of people in Spain, at least in the past, would have like a nap in the middle of the day and then they'd work in the morning, go home for a few hours, and then open up the shop again. It's not because Spanish people are lazy. It's because it's just so hot that you have to adapt your routines and your habits to the weather. So 32 to 35 while being hot sounds just about bearable.
Oh yeah, it's not as bad as in Spain. I sound like I'm complaining about the weather. In the summer in Chicago, it's not that bad. It's not that bad.
Everybody complains about the weather. Like I do it all the time. Even if it's a really, really nice day, I'll be like, it's only 25 degrees. It's sunny, but there's a few clouds. Like, oh, damn it.
It's a good small talk topic. You can connect with
But
anybody about it.
100%. Now, I'm wearing green, and I believe that in Chicago, for St. Patrick's Day, they kind of dye the main river bright green. Is this the case?
Yeah, I think they still do this. I haven't gone down to the Chicago River for the celebration, but yeah, they have done it for a really long time, I think. And yeah, it's bright green. Everybody wears green. They celebrate St. Patrick's Day. They, try to do Irish things, and yeah, it's a big holiday in Chicago.
Right, sounds good. Does this mean that in Chicago, like historically, there were lots of Irish migrants who moved over and settled there? I'm not sure if you know about the history or
I don't
not.
even think so. Yeah, I'm not sure. I would like to give you an answer, but I think yeah, it might be true. It might be true. There's a lot of migration historically to Chicago, but some of the bigger groups are Polish people and Mexican people, and so a lot of those, the holidays or the traditions that they have are spread around Chicago. Some things like sometimes people say that they're Irish, but maybe it's their great 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 grandparent, or they're not. They have an Irish last name, and they're like, I'm Irish, so I'm gonna buy some Guinness, wear green, and then go down to the city, and then a bunch of people who aren't Irish go too. Yeah, it's like I think it's a good excuse to celebrate for people in Chicago, and I'm not 100% sure if it's if it's something that's been around for a long time, or if Chicago has a big Irish background.
Uh, If anybody is wise to this topic and knows a little bit about American history and Chicago, then please do let us know in the comments. And if you have any questions for myself or Charlie, then do not hesitate to send us a message in the comments as well. Now, moving on from that, you said, of course, that you are a teacher. You teach online. You teach in particular Spanish speakers of like intermediate to advanced levels. But have you always done this? Like since you were a child or since you started working, have you always worked as an English teacher?
No, not really. When I started working, well, I in the United States, it's very common for people in high school to have, part-time jobs. And so for a while, I had these part-time jobs, and I also studied journalism, so I worked as a journalist. And then when I was 22, and I'm 28 right now, so this was 6 years ago, maybe 6.5 years ago, I moved to Costa Rica, and I started teaching English immediately. And so I've been doing it for about 6 years, but no, I've not always been teaching English. Yeah, the languages kind of came to me a little bit late. Maybe, I mean, I say late, but 22 is pretty young too, right?
Uh, so, journalism, how come? Why did you decide to study it?
I, yeah, I wanted to work in sports, and basically, that was a way that I could do it. And actually, so I started maybe like my last year of high school, and then studied journalism at the University of Missouri. And I ended up working with the Associated Press, which is a big, journalism agency or news agency, international too. And I was the correspondent for Missouri, which was the university that I went to. And so I've covered basketball, like the university basketball and American football games, and also some pro sporting events in Chicago. I loved it. It was great. And I did it while I was in college. And actually, part of it too was that was one of the reasons why I started learning Spanish, because in baseball in the United States, about 30 to 40% of the players come from Latin America. And so that was something that set me apart, or made me a little bit different than the other candidates for those types of jobs. Then, eventually it didn't end up making a difference, because I left journalism and started working in teaching. But what both what you do and what I do in terms of, posts on different platforms, that this is also journalism, right? We're also creating content and informing people. So I'd like to think that I still do some type of journalism. Yeah.
Like, so, knowing what you know now, of course, it's impossible to know this when you're 18 and you're making the big decision of going to university and what to study. Knowing what you know now, would you still do the same thing at uni?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I feel like
Yeah,
I'm asking
honestly,
you, I'm asking you all of these existential questions, like, oh my God, I never thought about that.
it's interesting. I think like we could always go back and modify the past, but I don't have any regrets about what I did. To be honest, like I think a lot of people don't know what they want to do when they're 18. And maybe you can answer this question next. What did you want to do when you were 18? But basically, um, I wanted to work in sports. I did it for 4 years. I learned a lot of communication skills. I lost fear of speaking to people. I grew a lot, and I made money too, because I was working. And by that last year, then I moved to Costa Rica, and I was like, look, I did it. I did what I wanted to do. And that was like my dream, to go and talk to professional athletes, and, do journalism. And, you start to realize too, some of the negatives of the industry. It's there's a lot of adrenaline in news, but then you're kind of always working. If news breaks and it's midnight, well, you have to be there. And a lot of people were very burned out. They were very tired in the industry. And so, I did everything I wanted to do. And I realized, okay, let's try something else, or let's go. I wanted to improve my Spanish and maybe come back to the United States. That didn't end up happening. And so, no, I don't know if I would change anything. I think a couple of small details, possibly, but I don't have regrets necessarily you know, about what I studied at university. But what about you when you were 18? If you could go back to that time, would you change things or no?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've been speaking to people about recently and students as well. And like you, when I was 18, one of the things that I wanted to do in life was to work in sport. And that's why I prepared two different application letters to universities. And one of them was to work to study physiotherapy with the idea of moving to Spain and working as a physiotherapist for Real Betis, for example.
There you
And
go.
the other one was to do languages, just because I remember at that time when I was 16, 17, I was watching lots of documentaries, like travel documentaries. And I was fascinated by the idea of globe trotting and traveling around to different continents and different countries. But I didn't want to be the typical Brit or American as well that goes there and expects people to speak in English. So that's why I was thinking okay, I want to travel and I want to meet people from around the world. I was also thinking okay, Spanish people are beautiful or Brazilians are really sexy. So with this kind of idea in mind when I was 18, I was like, okay, I'm going to study languages because it's a safer option. Because if I do physiotherapy, then I might end up just working in a clinic and having to massage people with lower back pain. And it's not really as romantic as, I don't know, working for Real Betis or Barcelona or Real Madrid. That was the kind of idea back then. And to be honest, I've mentioned this a few times that I do regret going to university a little bit just because of the system where it's more about meeting people and having fun than it is about actually learning. And at that stage in your life, you're not really ready to study that much, or at least I wasn't. But you do have to pay a lot. So I know it's worse in the US, but in the UK, you also pay a lot in tuition fees. And if you move to another city, you have to get a loan and then you have to pay it back. So then you're constantly and maybe forever going to be in debt to the state until you get rich, basically. And you're paying it off month by month, coming out of your taxes. So knowing that now as an adult, 14 years since I went to university for the first time, I'm like, well, if I'd have known all this, and if I'd have known that I wanted to work as an online language teacher, then maybe I'd have just moved to Spain and started teaching and improved my language skills like that. And it's kind of difficult for people who are 18 to know what they want to do in life. And I think this is the biggest advantage that anyone can have when they are growing up. This is on YouTube. If you ever listen to any interviews with Mr. Beast, for example, the biggest YouTuber in the world, he knew exactly what he wanted to do when he was 11. And he was obsessed with making it a success. And look at him now. He had this advantage that he was very clear in his passion and his future. And this is very, very hard to find. But I think the system should help people discover what they want to do at a younger age than finishing uni and still not really knowing what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a difficult decision to make too, because I don't know, maybe you can answer this for me, but in some communities in the United States, kids don't feel like they have the decision. They feel like they are forced to not forced, but that's what they're going to do, go to university. And, they learn about the loans, third year, second year, or maybe immediately, but they don't have that option. They have some pressure from their parents to go to university. But when their parents went to university, it was $2,000, not $40,000 a year, $50,000 a year, at least in the United States. What is that like in the UK? Is Is it similar? Do kids feel pressure to go to university?
I don't know if it's pressure usually from like parents, but it's perhaps, at least in my case, like the vast majority of people will go to uni. So then there is a little bit of peer pressure where you want to follow in the footsteps of your friends and people in the year above. So this seems like the most common path to becoming independent, leaving your parents' house, and then after it, getting a job and being successful. And during this time, of course, you're going to be in debt, but you're going to be living in student accommodation, meeting people from all over the country and world sometimes. And you're going to be going out, getting drunk, having a great time. So these are the things that I prioritized back then. And I think most people still do. But nowadays, I think so many people go to university that a university degree has lost quite a lot of value, because if
Oh
everybody
yeah.
has it, then what's the point in having it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's the same thing in the United States where, well, it's not a majority. It's about, I think, 30 to 35% of people in the United States have gone to university. But still, that's a lot of people. That's 100 million people. So it's in certain circles, it's very normal. And I was lucky in the sense that I knew that I wanted to do journalism. And so I went to one of the best journalism schools in the country. And the first 2 years, you have your general education classes. But really, the journalism school that I went to at University of Missouri, they have you work those last 2 years. Almost instead of studying, you're just working instead. And it feels weird at the time because you're like, paying to work. This is not, this is kind of wrong. But then you have those years of experience on your resume. You know how to do your job. And I was also working for the Associated Press, so I was getting paid by them. And I had a pretty purposeful college experience, but I might be the minority. I know that a lot of people in the United States that go to university, they're like, I just need this paper so I can have an access to an office job. And that's what a lot of people, that's what ends up happening for a lot of people. And in that case, it's sometimes hard to justify, the debt because it is a lot of money. And in the United States, it's something like 80% of college graduates graduate with debt. It's almost everybody. It's almost everybody. So it's definitely a problem in the United States. But there's a lot of debt in the United States, not just college, medical debt, consumer debt. It's a country with a lot of debt.
Interesting. And just going over a couple of things that have popped up that I've realized. So the first one you just said, a resume. So a resume would be American English, and a CV would be more British English. I asked you about uni and university, whereas you would usually say college.
I would say college, but I've adapted my working with Spanish speakers and talking and having lived in Europe for a year. I've learned to say university, but yeah, my brain wants to say college. Yeah.
Uh, And then there was one more that you haven't said, and I haven't said it either, but I realized from a friend of mine who's French that he said it in a more American way the other day when we were having a chat. And it is when you've got a form, for example, and you're going, what would you say?
If I understand correctly, I would say to check off the boxes.
Exactly. Yes. I was worried I hadn't explained that enough. But yeah, so Americans would say to check or check off the boxes, and Brits would say tick. So this
Yeah.
ticks all my boxes.
Uh,
So if you're
yeah.
thinking, like, even if it's metaphorically, you're thinking about, I need to buy a house. So, all right, I want 3 rooms. I want 2 bathrooms. I want an open plan living room. Okay, these are all my boxes. This flat ticks all my boxes. Now, you mentioned Germany and Costa Rica. Let's start with Costa Rica. I would love to go. Many people kind of speak about Costa Rica as being this natural paradise. So it's definitely on my bucket list. But in your case, why did you move? And what's it like in Costa Rica?
Well, this is an interest. The second question's interesting. But I'll answer the first one first. So I moved basically because when I was in university, I had some courses that I needed to fill in terms of credit hours, some hours I needed to graduate. And one of the opportunities was to study abroad for just 2 weeks in Costa Rica. And so I went and I liked it a lot. And I realized, okay, this is, it's a pretty good quality of life too. It's not, sometimes in the United States, I had never really left the country. And in the United States, we don't know as much about other countries as the other countries know about the United States and other countries themselves. There's a lot of ignorance in the U.S. about what life is like in other countries. So I realized and I learned, okay, that's pretty good quality of life in Costa Rica too. And I ended up moving to improve my Spanish at the beginning, and to teaching English was a way that I could work. I needed to make money to afford an apartment and everything. And so that's why I moved there. And I've stayed partly because, yeah, I mean, so I haven't been this full time in Costa Rica, but, yeah, overall, the safety is pretty good right now in comparison to other Latin American countries. Now it's changing a little bit, but overall, coming from Chicago, Chicago is more dangerous than Costa Rica is in general. And so, I feel pretty comfortable here. And yeah, in terms, can you remind me of the second question? What is Costa Rica
Basically
like? That was
about
the,
Costa Rica, yeah. What's it like? Is it
yeah,
as beautiful and natural and amazing as I've heard?
yeah, it really is. But I think a lot of people don't understand the demography. Now that's a kind of an academic word, but what it's really like in Costa Rica, because you have this Central Valley. It's in the middle of the country, four main cities, and it's about 60% of the population that lives in this area. The temperature is very mild. It's usually, between, in the morning, maybe 17, 18 to 20, 21 degrees, and it doesn't get above 30 degrees. Kind of, I mean, it depends on the area, but normally it's in the mid 20s. Feels great. Being from Chicago, I love the weather here. It's unbelievable. I couldn't even believe it. The first year that I was here, I was like, I can wear, a t-shirt every day of the year and I'm fine. And so the weather's really nice. The scenery is beautiful. I can look out my window and see mountains and trees and stuff. And that's not as normal in the United States. And the nature's kind of outside. There is nature in that Central Valley, but it's mainly outside. And it's a very biodiverse country. It has a lot of biodiversity, a lot of animals, a lot of, you know, different fruits and vegetables that I had never seen before. But it's kind of, the nature can sometimes be hard to get to. It's, a lot of people say you need a car to get there. You can do things with the buses, but, it's not always reliable to get there using the public transportation. So there's mountains, and then on the coasts, there's beaches. And I remember when I first arrived to Costa Rica, looking at the beaches, they were just different than any of the beaches I had seen in the United States. They're just much more beautiful. Even the beaches that people said, oh, no, don't go there, it's ugly. I was in the water and I'm like, there's mountains behind the beach. I'd never seen that before. I was like, this is so beautiful. It really is beautiful. That being said, there is so much tourism, and a lot of foreigners have moved to Costa Rica, and especially like on the coasts, that some of the most beautiful areas are now becoming difficult to access for people in Costa Rica, and they've become very luxurious. And this is not, I know this is not an issue that's unique to Costa Rica. I know in Spain, probably some of the islands off of Spain have faced similar issues, and across Latin America, we see this. But yeah, that's right now, that's a very popular or trending topic, is gentrification. And, in my case, I don't live on the beach. I live in the Central Valley. I live in an area that where it's almost everybody is Costa Rican. But when you go to the beach, a lot of times you see, if half foreigners, if not the majority foreigners, and there's some areas along the coast that it's almost all foreigners. So you can do some good tourism, but it's gotten pretty expensive, and yeah, it's up to you if you think it's worth it or not. You're gonna have to save up for your Costa Rica vacation, but when you look at the mountains, you look at the cloud forest, rainforest, hot springs, beaches, it is a very, very beautiful country. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds amazing, but one of the downsides that when you have so much biodiversity and rainforests and amazing plants and stuff like that is that you'll have creepy crawlies as well. Um, so I'm a little bit of
Oh
a
yeah.
coward. I'm a little bit of a chicken. So when I was living in Australia, I managed to get by okay because, of course, over there you've got huge spiders, huge snakes. I didn't really come across too many, but I'm a little bit afraid of creepy crawlies and bugs and insects. So what's it like in that regard?
Yeah. There's definitely insects. There's a lot of mosquitoes, cockroaches, and it's interesting because in Chicago, when we think of cockroaches, we associate them with dirt. And if your building is really old, you might have cockroaches. But I noticed that in Costa Rica, there's a lot of times you just can't avoid cockroaches. It doesn't matter how clean you are. Uh, you know, they're gonna be there. And the same thing with mosquitoes. And it just takes a little bit of getting used to. At the beginning, so the cockroaches that we have in Chicago are also not as big. They're a little bit smaller. And the ones in Costa Rica are like maybe oftentimes the size of my thumb, and they're faster, and sometimes they're even bigger, and they can fly sometimes. And that was definitely scary, for maybe not scary, but at the beginning I was like, oh man, that is. I hated cockroaches because I didn't, it wasn't the easiest. It's not like a bug. It's a lot bigger. They're more agile. They can move. They can fly sometimes, and yeah, sometimes you just can't avoid it. So you have to maybe, I don't know, build up some of that courage before that trip to Costa Rica. But I think you can. It's not, you get used to it. You get used to it. And Ticos, people from Costa Rica are very used to it. They've dealt with it their whole lives. And now I'm definitely more used to bugs, and they don't bother me as much. I think the other thing is it helps when you know that it's nature. It's not you being dirty. It's not your building being old. It's, that there's a forest right there, or there's a big green area that they cut the grass and there's bugs, and that it's not as gross or disgusting when that they're coming from nature and not from an 100-year-old building with bad, with like old wood that produces bugs. So yeah, that helps.
I think it will take quite a lot of getting used to, but I'm ready and prepared for the challenge, you know? If you don't face your fear, there's no way of overcoming them. So, yeah, I've
There
got to
you
go in
go.
with that attitude. And it's true that in the south of Spain, near like the coast in Cadiz, where I go in summer quite a lot, there are some big, big cockroaches. You don't have like snakes, really spiders or anything like that, but there are a lot of roaches, and some of them are flying roaches as well, which can catch you off guard sometimes when you're like, oh, it's fine. I just like step on it. It'll be all right. And then it starts flying away. Yeah, scary. Now, of
Yeah,
course, in Costa Rica, they speak Spanish. You just mentioned ticos, and this is like the term to refer to Costa Ricans. Um, I
exactly.
speak Spanish, let's say, Spanish from Spain, but I spent 6 months in Argentina when I was at university. So I used to have a little bit of an Argentinian twang. And also, I was familiar with some Argentinian slang words. And in South America, Latin America, it's true that between different countries, there are lots of different slang words that will vary from one country to another. Off the top of my head, if you think about straws, like straws to drink something, I'm pretty sure that between all of the Spanish speaking countries, there is a different word. In
Yeah.
Spain, it's pajita. Um,
Okay.
in Costa Rica, what is it?
I would like to say pajilla. It's
Okay.
similar. Yeah, but I'm not an authority on it, but I think it's pajilla, yeah.
Okay. Now, speaking about Spanish in general, how was your process of learning once you moved to Costa Rica?
Yeah, that's a good question. So at the beginning, well, in the United States, we almost everybody learns Spanish in school. Now, it's not always the highest quality. But I noticed this when I learned Portuguese and German, I didn't have that base knowledge that I had in Spanish. And so, what a lot of, and you probably understand this as well as someone who comes from an English speaking country is, some people know vocabulary, but what's really hard for us is conjugations. And so that was definitely um, a challenge with conjugations. I had maybe this B1, B2 level, so intermediate level. But when I went to Costa Rica, I could do pretty well in, one-to-one conversation. But it was a very neutral Spanish. We taught more Mexican Spanish in the United States or Spain Spanish. No one's taught Costa Rican Spanish unless, they're studying in Costa Rica. And what was really difficult for me at the beginning were the situations on the street where, you know, people would speak very quickly and words that I didn't know. And so they would use slang and very, very fast. And it made me take a step back and be like, okay, this is kind of hard. This is kind of hard. But I just kept practicing. One benefit is that I met a girl here in Costa Rica who's now my girlfriend. We've been dating for over 5 years, and we speak together in Spanish. I spoke with her friends in Spanish, and then I had my own friends, and then even some of my students. When we weren't in classes, if we were out at a restaurant. So I had a lot of practice. In Spanish, and that helped a lot. So uh, I think there was one point that I basically identified. Here's what I still need to work on, and that really changed some things for me. Being proactive about my main mistakes, and I use that in my teaching methodology as well. Okay, what are the main mistakes that you make? All right, give a million examples and get them checked. And so, for me, it was a lot of the common mistakes um, that English speakers make in Spanish. So ser versus estar, por y para, the subjunctive tense. Um, yeah, a lot of times with indirect and direct objects, le versus lo versus la. And those are things I still struggle with a little bit sometimes. There's still some uncertainty. But I worked on it a lot. And yeah, that plus practice has led me to where I am today, where I would like to say I manage a pretty high level of Spanish. It's not perfect, but yeah, it's definitely people here in Costa Rica are like, oh, I haven't heard a gringo speak like that. And that being said, we're not the best examples of multilingual. We are good examples, but English speakers are some of the least multilingual people in the world. So it's a low bar, it's a low standard, but I'm glad to say I
Absolutely.
passed it.
This is why when somebody tells you this, because a lot of people will tell me when I'm speaking in Spanish as well, like, oh my God, you speak so well. This is so weird. And then they'll kind of caveat it by saying, like, I've never heard an English person speak as well as you. But then it might happen with a Belgian who are born kind of trilingual all the time,
Hmm.
or Scandinavians who are always the best at speaking English, but they, of course, also speak Norwegian or Finnish or Swedish, for example. But you were, let's say, in a more privileged scenario because you actually moved to a Spanish speaking environment. You met a Costa Rican, you had Costa Rican friends. So it was very easy for you to immerse yourself in the culture. And it was the same for me when I moved to Seville because I moved because of my Spanish girlfriend. So I already had her in laws and
Okay.
families that I could connect with and have a chat with. So we didn't, let's say, have to work that hard for it, comparatively speaking. But many people will be wanting to improve their English, but they won't be able to move to the US or the UK, Ireland, Australia, Canada, etc. So for those people listening who are fitting and ticking all of these boxes or checking all of these boxes, what advice would you give them to immerse themselves in English and improve their English without necessarily having to move to an English-speaking country?
Yeah, yeah. I think both of us can answer this question as we're both teachers and we've kind of done it. What I would say mainly is first of all, it's going to depend on your level. I think once you get to that intermediate level, it becomes a lot easier because at the beginner level, you can try to listen to things in English, but you won't be understanding it as well. And, even if it's going to be hard to understand us too at the beginner level. So I'm guessing I'm speaking to people with a more intermediate or higher level. And in this case, I generally suggest, what are the things you like to do in your native language and just replicate those into your target language. So if this case is English, that's a very easy way to sustain habits. Instead of, opening up a textbook and doing exercise 3 on page 44, you're not going to enjoy that. You're not going to naturally do that. But let's say you follow, I don't know, La Liga Española maybe, and you're interested also, in international soccer. Well, if you listen to a podcast in Spanish about soccer, you can add a podcast in English. And notice how I say add, not replace, because once you start replacing, it's going to become unsustainable again because there's going to be some rejection there, psychologically that, hey, I have to do this for some type of work or homework. So if you can just add that type of media, and maybe the existing habits that you have in your native language, that's going to help a lot. And I've used this strategy for all 3 of the languages that I've learned, and it's gotten me to reach a C1 level in all of them. And the other thing after that, you might have like 3 or 4 or 5 things that you do in the language then of consuming. You have to focus on production. And so this can be, okay, lessons, group conversation. Of course, having friends from the country is the best option because you don't really have to pay for that. And it's good practice with normal people. But yeah, some exercises that I did were, some periodical lessons, not all the time, but some lessons in a lot of writing. And the writing doesn't have to be like what you think of in school, like essays. It could be like I work on with a lot of my students, choose a topic that you like. What's a topic you're interested in? And just do some journaling about it. And some of them come to the lesson and they were like, Charlie, I really enjoyed that writing homework. And that's like the first time I've heard I've really enjoyed that writing homework, in my life. And I'm like, great, okay, that's awesome. And I do the same thing. I might read a book in Spanish, do some journaling on what I think about the book, and that's perfect practice in terms of production. So that would be my main suggestion is replicate the habits that you have in Spanish in terms of what you consume on social media, Spotify, YouTube, stuff like that. And yeah, then after that, what are you curious about in that culture? So for me, I think that Latin American food is better than US American food. So when I search for recipes, it depends on the thing. Like if I'm searching for barbecue, okay, maybe I'll search in English. There's some really good barbecue in certain places in the United States. But if I'm searching for like pupusas, no, of course I'm going to search for that in Spanish. And so finding those things that you're curious about in those other languages. I did the same thing with German. I was interested in like the work-life balance from a more European perspective because in the United States and Latin America, I don't think it's that great. And I learned a lot reading books about, psychology and the difference between, work time and, more recreational time and even a bunch of new perspectives about the fulfillment of work and the role of work in society. And it was something that did not feel like homework. It did not feel like, training my German. It just felt kind of normal. Once you've hit that point, you're good. Once you've hit that point, you're going to continue practicing that language. And so those would be my tips. What about you? What would your tips be?
I mean, honestly, I've been listening and I've been nodding my head, and I'm often nodding my head all the time whenever I'm teaching or whenever I'm interviewing someone. I just tend to do this. Maybe it's becoming some kind of like tick that I need to get rid of. But I was actually nodding my head because I was like, mate, I agree with everything you're saying. And people who have already listened to many of these interviews, usually what I preach is immersion and doing what you enjoy doing, but doing it in English. So I always recommend the same things with football. If they like La Liga, well, just watch more Premier League with English kind of commentators. Also the same thing with series. Watch English series, podcasts, listen to English podcasts, the news, read it on the BBC or something like that. So basically anything that you would normally do in your mother tongue, switch it to English. And then at the same time, I guess it's important just to write down some notes or put some new words in flashcards if you really want to, just because, of course, if you already have a good level, you're going to see the same words repeated over and over again, and you don't need to take any notes because it's second nature. You already know all of these words. However, when you see a new word that you're not familiar with, I think it is good just on your phone, for example, to write it in your notes, and then you can have on your notes app, I don't know, words of the week, just to kind of refresh your memory, because it's true that with language learning and learning anything, to be honest, it's all about repetition. So if you read it once or listen to it once, or it comes across on subtitles when you're watching a film, you're not going to remember it if you only see it once. However, if you've written it down, that's another action that you can tick off. Then if you've checked your notes later, it's like, okay, that's the third time now. Then if you're having a conversation and you're like, oh, this is the perfect moment to use the verb flinch. So that's a random example, but basically do everything that Charlie recommended. But then I'd say also, whenever you see new expressions, phrasal verbs, stuff like that, just take a little note. You don't have to study it immediately, but just go back to it, review it, and then when you do see it again in a natural context, you'll already be like, ding, okay, that is the verb to flinch. Now, of course, I know what it means. That's just that little cherry on top, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. Can I add a note to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I get this a lot of times where a student might be reading a book or watching a series, and they're like, well, do I need to have the dictionary next to it and write down all the new words that I'm looking at or that I'm seeing? And I actually tell them no. What I usually will say is the words are less important than the habit. If you can sustain a habit, you'll be fine. And for the rest of your life, you'll have that consumption in English. But the words are important to grow your vocabulary. But some strategies that they can do are maybe the first 5 minutes of the show, you write down the new words you don't know. And then the rest of the show, you enjoy it. You don't have to worry about it. Or if you're reading an article, multiple articles, let's say that first article, you take the words down. And the next ones, you don't do anything. And maybe you can search a word, of course, if you don't understand the context. But that's one of the mistakes that I've sometimes found is, all right, Charlie, if I'm watching this series, it's not sustainable to watch the series and write down all the new words that I find. I'm never going to continue that habit. And so what I usually will say, hey, first 5 minutes, write down those words, rest of the time, enjoy. Or one day of the week, write down the words, the other days of the week, just enjoy. Don't worry about it. So this is something that I'm sure you would probably agree with too. The habit is a little bit more important than the words, but the words definitely help. Yeah.
No, 100%. Like, for example, if you're starting doing this with a lower level, then I'd say just if you see words that are repeated regularly, write them down just to double check and confirm. And then as you get to a higher level of understanding, for example, when I'm posting my videos on my other channel, englishconversation, basically all of the words and phrases that I translate are stuff that when I'm watching something either in Spanish or in English, usually I put the subtitles in the other language just to kind of be exposed all the time. I'm not saying that's the best method, but I'll do it to be able to get inspiration for my posts in Spanish and English.
Nice.
And it's a good thing that you can do that doesn't really take any effort if it's once per 5 minutes just to
That's the important
be like,
thing.
okay, what was it? What was the expression? It was hit the nail on the head. Perfect. And then just leave it. And then you can go over it later and carry on watching
There you go.
whatever you were watching.
Fully agree.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a perfect way to call it a day and end it because it's a nice way to end if we are agreeing.
Yeah. Not that we've had many disagreements, but I agree. Again, it's a good place to end.
Perfect. So, thank you everybody for watching. I hope you found this interesting, learning a lot more about Charlie, about Chicago, about journalism, Costa Rica, and language learning, of course. And if you do have any questions, as I said before, leave us a comment and we'd be happy to respond and answer as quickly as possible. And Charlie, thank you so much for being a guest and joining us.
That was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
And watch this space. Who knows? Maybe we'll be doing this again in Spanish.
We'll see.
We'll see. Also, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Charlie, and see you next time. Bye bye.